Good evening. A big welcome to everyone. It's really nice to see so many of you here for tonight's special event organized by Victoria Reuchle, who is a senior fellow here at the Collegium at the moment, and is here together with an associate fellow, Corinna Reinhardt. So we have this senior fellow program here where people who are in Zurich as academic visitors stay here and participate in the Collegium, and part of what they then event to do, and which is always a great pleasure then for us, is to organize some form of event. And Victoria, you seem to have hit a nerve. So you got a large crowd in here with a hugely appealing topic. I don't know whether, at least appealing in the sense that people want to come and hear what exactly is this about. So that's very, very nice. This is now a moderated forum here. And so I also would like to welcome the people, Anna Elsner, who actually at some earlier point has also been a senior fellow here, Markus Hafner, Reto Bühler, Victoria, of course, and then Marie-Therese Meder, who's going to do the moderation. And without anything more, great that you're all here, and take it from here. Who wants the microphone? You all have microphones. Good.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sebastian, for the introduction. And hello, everybody, colleagues, friends, and guests. A warm welcome from my side as well. So, laughing at death. Tonight we'll explore how people respond to mortality with humor or experience moments of unintended comic relief, moments of absurdity in the face of dying, parody and irony that question familiar ideas about death, mourning customs, or the afterlife, and playful images that remind us of both life's fragility and of the need to enjoy the present. I have the honor of convening the event, so let me take a few minutes to explain on how on earth we came up with this topic. Well, for a start, I've always had an interest in death and happily fostered these morbid tendencies when studying in Vienna, the self-acclaimed capital of necrophiles. But of course, that's only the anecdotal part of the story. When preparing for this fellowship, I spoke with several colleagues here in Zurich to identify a topic that would connect my own research on irony with current work at the university. My host, Corinna Reinhardt, accompanied these early conversations and helped me navigate the academic landscape. Around the same time, I was also in touch with Markus Hafner, whose recent book on satire and mourning in ancient literature resonated strongly with my own work. And from our conversations, the idea for a joint event emerged quite naturally, I'd say, including the decision to approach the topic across media and disciplines. So from there, it went smoothly. Markus suggested involving Reto Bühler, director at the marvelous Friedhof Forum, and thanks to Reto, we were lucky enough to bring on board Marie-Therese Meder, a scholar of religion and a wonderfully skilled moderator. Mario Wimmer, deputy director here at the Collegium, proposed inviting Anna Elsner, a former fellow, and as it turns out, a perfect match for tonight's theme. Finally, the practical organization of the event rests in the expert hands of Andrea Truttmann and Jamie Bisam from the event office, together with Nick Lehmann from communications, who ensured that everything runs smoothly tonight. So thank you very much for this. With this collaborative effort in mind, let me now turn to the topic itself and explain why it is so clearly calling for an interdisciplinary approach. As a classical archaeologist, I work with images and objects. They do tell us a great deal about ancient cultures, about norms, expectations, and social practices, but humor is notoriously hard to detect. A dancing skeleton may strike us as funny today, yet we cannot be sure what ancient viewers reacted to, how ancient viewers reacted to that. In many cases, the humorous or ironic intent of an image only emerges against the background of contemporary texts. And vice versa, material culture often substantiates or calls into questions what we think we know from literature. grave monuments, burial costumes, and the performative aspects of funerary ritual preserved in the archaeological record all help us to contextualize and sometimes to challenge textual assumptions. But laughing at death is not an exclusively Roman or Greek phenomenon, of course. On the contrary, it seems to be a deeply human, cross-cultural, and remarkably persistent practice. Across time and societies, humor has served as a way to confront, understand, and even domesticate mortality, not only in moments of acute grief or dying, but also as a more general response to the deep existential fear of death that shapes human experience. Laughter may signal unease or nervousness, the not knowing how to behave in emotionally overwhelming situations. It may help us soften fear, sadness, or pain, and it can even act as an apotropaic gesture, a way to ward off the very thing that frightens us. For tonight's event, we have tried to stay clear of offensive humor, though, of course, the boundary between what is merely dark and what is genuinely offensive is subjective and culturally variable. What matters for our purposes here is that humor in the face of death is neither trivial nor disrespectful. In fact, psychological research over the last decades has shown that laughter, even at the most difficult moments, can play an important role in how individuals and communities cope with grief. One of the leading voices in this field is the psychologist George Bonanno from Columbia University, whose work has fundamentally changed how we understand grief, trauma, and mourning. Bonanno's extensive empirical studies, he was among the first to track individuals before and after loss, demonstrate that human responses to death are more varied and more resilient than the traditional 5 stages of grief model may suggest. So the traditional 5 stages being denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then finally acceptance. A substantial proportion of people do not plunge into long-term despair. Instead, many maintain stable psychological functioning, even experiencing positive emotions shortly after bereavement. Resilience is not a rare exception, it is often the norm. One crucial mechanism that supports resilience is the ability to laugh, to smile, to experience moments of levity, even in mourning. In Bonanno's studies, bereaved spouses who showed genuine, spontaneous smiles when recalling their partners, even very soon after the loss, tended to fare better emotionally over the following month. They experienced fewer symptoms of depression, maintained closer social bonds, and were better able to navigate the practical and emotional challenges of grief. This does not mean that laughter replaces grief or signals denial. Bonanno explicitly warns against misinterpreting resilience as coldness or detachment. Rather, laughter can open up emotional flexibility. It allows us to oscillate between sorrow and relief, to release tension, to breathe again, and to slowly reintegrate loss into the continuity of everyday life. Psychologists also point out that humor reduces stress, lowers blood pressure, triggers endorphin release, strengthens the immune system, and creates social cohesion. All of these psychological and social effects play a role in supporting individuals as they process grief or fear of dying. Humor helps regulate emotions that might otherwise overwhelm us. And it also helps reduce the social awkwardness that often surrounds mourning. Brief moments of lightness make it easier for others to approach, to offer support, and simply to be present. In that sense, humor provides what Bonanno calls coping ugly. Coping that is not always neat, solemn, or conventionally appropriate, but often remarkably effective. Laughing at death takes many different forms: witty grave inscriptions, gallows humor, jokes delivered at funerals, satirical texts on mourning, and the comic imagery of funerary art. Tonight we'll see several examples, and all of them do not deny the seriousness of death and loss. On the contrary, they acknowledge it and yet create a form of catharsis. Tonight brings together different disciplinary perspectives to discuss this phenomenon. You will learn more about the background of the panelists in a minute, but first let me introduce Our moderator, Marie-Therese Mäder, she's not only an experienced discussion leader in public formats, but also a renowned scholar of religion and media ethics. She teaches as Privatdozentin at LMU Munich and as a senior lecturer in the study of religion at the University of Basel. She also teaches media ethics at the Universities of Applied Sciences of the Grisons and Bern. And her research focuses on the visual culture of rites of passage and on the ethical dimensions of media practices. Inter alia, she is the editor of Highgate Cemetery, Image Practices in Past and Present, and co-editor of the thematic journal issue Death, Loss and Mourning in Film and Media, which explores how audiovisual media shape cultural understandings of mortality and grief. So there truly couldn't be a better fit. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand over to you and take my seat, actually.
Thank you, Victoria. No. Thank you, Victoria, for this very kind introduction. So my pleasure is now to introduce the members of this panel, and I ask you to step on the stage and sit down. So I have time so that we know a little bit who is sitting here and what is their background. I start with you, Victoria. Victoria Reuchle is a classical archaeologist specializing in visual culture and the history of emotions. Her interdisciplinary work integrates archaeology with philology, art history, philosophy, cultural anthropology, and cognitive science. Using ancient visual and textual sources, she explores human experiences such as love, violence, birth, and death. Dr. Reuchle studied classical archaeology, art history, and gender studies in Vienna and worked as a guide at the Narrenturm, the Pathological Anatomical Museum. This is Reto Bühler.
I'm so sorry.
That's good. No, that's good. In 2014, she completed the PhD at Freie Universität Berlin within the Cluster of Excellence Languages of Emotion. Her dissertation on motherhood in classical Athens was published in 2017 as Die Mütter Athens und ihre Kinder. She then joined LMU Munich, where she is now assistant professor of classical archaeology and recently completed her habilitation, Chain My Heart, Bound Eros and Greco-Roman Literature and Art. She co-edited Speaking Feeling and Pathos and Polis and has published widely on emotions, gender, desire, and mourning in antiquity. This fall, she is junior visiting professor at the Center for the Study of Ancient World and senior fellow at the Collegium Helveticum, of course.
Luckily.
Welcome. Okay, then here next is Anna Magdalena Elsner. She is an associate professor of French studies and medical humanities at the University of St. Gallen, and her research explores death and mourning in contemporary literature, philosophy, and film, promoting transdisciplinary perspective on medicine and end-of-life care. She holds a BA from Oxford and a PhD from Cambridge and has held positions or fellowships at King's College London, the University of Texas Medical Branch, Yale University, the Hastings Center, the University of Zurich, and the Camargo Foundation. She is the author of Mourning and Creativity in Proust and co-editor of The Proustian Mind and Literature and Medicine. She's currently principal investigator of Assisted Lab at ERC project examining the aesthetics laws and ethics of assisted dying and was recently a senior fellow at the Collegium Helveticum. Dr. Elsner is completing 2 books on death and mourning to be published next year, a co-authored monograph on assisted dying and an edited volume on disenfranchised grief. Probably you will say about that later more. Okay, and here we have Markus Hafner. He is professor of classics, Greek literature at the University of Zurich, where he joined the faculty in 2025. His research explores the literature and intellectual history of ancient Greece with particular attention to authorship and literary collaboration. He currently leads an EU project on anonymous Greek fan fiction and the rewriting of canonical texts, and has also examined ancient attitudes toward death and practices of mourning and consolation. Before coming to Zurich, he taught at the University of Graz as an assistant and later associate professor, completing his habilitation on collaborative authorship, a study that received the Bruno Snell Prize of the Mommsen Society in 2024. His academic career includes positions in Heidelberg, Berlin, a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and archival work on the history of classics during German National Socialism, published as monograph in 2025. His research emphasizes forms of creativity, including the roles of human and non-human actors in literary production. And now, finally, Reto Bühler. So it's good that we are not 10 people, but I think to introduce your history and your background is also interesting for the discussion. So, Reto Bühler has spent his career in cultural work. He began in 1980s as a product manager for a Swiss record company representing jazz and alternative musicians, then moved to London, where he earned the Cambridge Proficiency in English while working for Mute Records, the label of Depeche Mode and Nick Cave. In the early 1990s, he relocated to Germany, working for various record labels and moving between the UK, Germany, and the US. After settling in Hamburg, he founded an entertainment agency before returning to Zurich, where in 2001 he hosted Popstars Schweiz and completed a Master of Advanced Studies in Arts Management at ZHAW. From 2000 onwards, Reto Bühler shifted towards curating cultural programs, first at Kaufleuten, then as director of the jazz club Moods, and later at the arts center Kosmos. In 2020, he became director of Zurich's Friedhof Forum, dedicated to death, dying, and remembrance, where he curates exhibitions, talks, and concerts. He is currently studying applied history at the University of Zurich and lives in Zurich-Hottingen with his wife and daughter. Welcome to this panel discussion. And it's already the moment that I can hand over the word to Anna.
Thank you, thank you. Let me maybe move over here. So in our panel discussion, all of us panelists have brought you something from our research life, and I have brought you a short film, which I quickly want to say a couple of words about. And as Marie-Therese said at the beginning, I'm currently working on a project where we collect cultural productions, texts, films, poetry, plays, artworks that deal with assisted dying. And to this end, we've established an online open access archive. And the reason why we study these documents is that we want to understand two things. Firstly, if and how these cultural productions are cited in lawmaking contexts, so how they actually impact or change laws around assisted dying. And secondly, we want to understand how these cultural productions themselves frame legal frameworks. And in these kind of cultural mediations of assisted dying, humor arguably plays a very important role. So the short film that I've brought you, and which we'll be able to watch in its entirety, is a 10-minute short film that came out in 2002 by the Swiss filmmaker Benjamin Kempf. It got awarded at the time the Best Debut Film Award at the Solothurn Film Festival. I'm not going to say much about the film itself, but I just want to frame it for you, give you 2 pointers that allow you to understand why we have collected in our archive, and I think that also highlights the role that humor plays in that film. So firstly, the film itself is inspired by a real case, a case that happened in Switzerland at the time, a couple committing a double suicide, an elderly couple with only one of them suffering from a physical terminal condition. And secondly, at the time, a scientific study came out that assessed the role of the assisted suicide organization Exit and some of the cases that they were involved in the 1990s. And that study concluded that in many of the cases, it was not a terminal illness that led to the wish to die, but actually a form of existential or social suffering. This study was later cited in the media, and there was some discussion around whether Exit was really doing a good enough job in checking what kind of wishes led people to choose an assisted death. So without further ado, I give you the film. Please do enjoy.
Every line, and I kiss the name that you sign.
Ich glaube, es ist so weiter, Rudi.
And darling, then I read again right from the start.
Rudi?
Love letters straight
Rudi, was ist?
from your
Was nicht?
Wie meinst du jetzt das? Ist etwas nicht recht? Willst du etwas anderes haben? Also komm, sag jetzt, was ist?
Ich wollte einfach nicht mehr.
Ja, aber das haben wir doch abgemacht. Ja, also nein, das ist doch... Jetzt habe ich mich vorbereitet. Haben sie allen nichts gesagt, das Testament ist gemacht, Frau Schmid ist gekommen. Sind wir entschuldigt, Frau Schmid?
Wissen Sie, es muss auch gar nicht heute sein, wenn Sie nicht parat sind.
Ich wollte überhaupt nicht mehr. Auch nicht morgen. Haben Sie das verstanden, Sie Zwetschge? Ich wollte nicht sterben. Und schon gar nicht, wenn Sie da sitzen und reinschauen wie die Heilige Maria. Mit Ihren Kuhaugen.
So, also Rudi, jetzt nehmen die wirklich zusammen.
Nein, jetzt nehmen wir mich nicht zusammen.
Wir haben es doch zusammen beschlossen.
Zusammen beschlossen. Ich muss noch nicht sterben. Ich bin ja nicht der, der Krebs hat.
Rudi, komm mal, was erzählst du für Sachen? Hm? Was möchtest du auch machen ohne mich? Hm?
Was machen? Was machen? Leben halt. Ich bin ja noch nicht so alt, oder? Ich habe noch viel leben, oder?
Ja, ja, sicher.
Das macht nichts. Das ist vollkommen.
Okay, Anna, you brought us that film, so my first question goes to you. What do you think, what role does humor play in this film? Why is it important, or for what message is it important?
I think in that film in particular, humor makes a space that allows us to think across some of the tensions, ambiguities, and power dynamics that are at stake in the practice of assisted dying. Mm-hmm. And I think, connecting to what I said when I tried to frame the film, I think on the one hand, we have a subversion of this topos of the double suicide, because what we see here is clearly a dominating/domineering wife that kind of blurs, the issue whether is Rudi really making a free choice. So it goes against this idealized image of a kind of Romeo and Juliet love decision that they're doing it together. At the end, of course, both of them are lying in bed laughing, and yet there is this kind of power dynamic. Mm-hmm. And I think the other point that I raised, the kind of criticism of Exit, the assisted dying organization, also, humor plays an important role in bringing this out. When Rudi addresses the representative of that assisted dying organization, asking her, why are you staring at me? What is your job here, really? And you do wonder as a viewer, what is she doing apart from, mixing the lethal drink? What is her role in this? And why is she, for example, not stopping? What is happening here? And maybe finally, a final point is, I think, the role of language. We have it at the very beginning when we hear Erika talk to her daughter, and she says, well, of course, you know, what do you think, what could go wrong? And this, I think, becomes extremely funny when you think that everything will go wrong for the daughter that day. Kind of really, you know, using that kind of everyday language and yet capturing an event of extreme gravity. And so I think humor really does kind of show the idealization of what assisted dying might be versus its reality. That is, I think, the role that it plays.
I mean, I heard laughter in the audience. I heard also laughter of you here. What was funny for you in this film? Why was it funny for you?
If I may, as a Swiss viewer, I think it's a different thing because you grew up with those actors. You know, they're very, very famous Volksschauspieler. They were in Wallerloo, and of course, Stephanie Glaser. They were in every film I remember, from Code Früh and all. I mean, and they. So that's why our perception is a bit different, probably, than when you just watch it as two elderly people. So we know they're very funny people. So you dealing first, you have a bit different kind of mindset to begin with. So that gives a different layer on top of this tragic story in a way, which it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're nodding.
Yeah, I think I found interesting, and that's what I talk about Lucian soon also, that Ruedi, he followed this habitual behavior. So he was kind of following what his wife said, and this what he usually did. So we had this kind of convention here, and yeah, that's in this special case was really unusual.
So then how was the language for you? Could you follow the Swiss German, or was it more the subtitles?
So I'm here since April, and I could quite, thanks to my colleagues,
Okay, good. Okay. Exam passed.
Me too.
So, yeah, okay. Victoria, how was it for you?
I found it also extremely sad, actually. I don't know if I was the only one crying. The dancing part has me. I've watched it for the second time now. And I think it's this juxtaposition of really voluntarily sad, melancholic moods. The music is sad, and the whole, atmosphere is kind of gloomy in a way. And then this comic, everyday language that makes it so interesting. And I don't know, but when watching it, you really want this release. You want to laugh. I think, right? So. I don't know. It doesn't have to be funny so much, but the point is that you need something to release the tension that was built up in this dancing scene, especially. I mean, of course, it's very well crafted. The whole juxtaposition of the traditional topos and then this everyday Alltag, right?
And I think you actually bring up something important, this kind of dancing scene and the interiority. And I think there is also playing with kind of Swiss stereotypes of like the middle-class home, and of course the kind of punctuality. She came here, on purpose. We made an appointment. We already told everyone, we can't be late, which I think also raises the kind of humorous register.
So do you think then the person, die Sterbebegleitung, is she the main character of this short film? Is she death?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, she strikes me as someone who is surprisingly uninvolved and almost a kind of viewer, trying to be neutral viewer, but in this neutrality really isn't. For example, when she says, well, you don't have to do it today, the assumption is, okay, then I'll have to do it tomorrow or the day after, and of course we all have to die at some point. So for me, she isn't the personification of death, but it does really bring across that kind of criticism of organizing death, trying to kind of domesticate it. That I tried to mention at the start.
I mean, the film is now almost 20 years old, so the public opinion about assisted dying changed in this time. Do you think this film influenced this discussion in a way?
So far, we are in this project always looking for to trace these influences. We haven't found a citation of this film in any kind of legal parliamentary debates. So I can't really speak to that because many of the sources that we find are just around. But I do think it captures something that we also see in contemporary cultural productions around assisted dying that are not 20 years old, that come out of countries that have legalized more recently. So I think this kind of fear of what this organizing an event in our lives that is at its core intrinsically seems uncontrollable and unorganizable. I think it captures this, and this is something that has definitely stayed with the debate.
So I am aware that now you're more talking about if people are choosing assisted suicide, you're more openly talking about this, like also in my friend circles. 20 years ago, nobody was talking about. And I think this something changed probably, and this I agree that these films have. Is it different when people are at the burial and do you know usually if this was an assisted suicide or you?
Well, I must say I'm not often at burials actually, because
but you have people around you.
Thank God, no. But my colleagues are, they're undertakers, but I hardly see any death. Thank God. I only deal with it theoretically, the whole thing. So as we all do in a way, don't we?
Yeah.
So, well, me?
You're not Harold from Harold.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Harold. No, I don't drive around in a nice car. Yes. So I'm not so sure if that. Normally, don't know that. I mean, it's not something which is publicized. Much the way of, you never know what the cause of death is really.
Okay. No. But in this film, there is an ethical border that is transgressed. Was it for you as well, or is it just in my perception that there is?
Terrible.
Yeah. Tell me more about that.
No, I mean that's just really my subjective feeling, and I feel with Suzanne, the daughter. I think it's just terrible to let both parents go at one day, and no, I'm very critical and skeptical towards that, but yeah.
Rightly so. I mean, every death is individual. And the perception of death is completely different. Every one of us has a completely different way of looking at the things. For me, because I have to deal with this topic every day. For years, it has quite a natural touch to it. I'm not afraid or anything with it. But I mean, everybody reacts differently, so you have to be careful when you do this sort of thing. When you confront people with the possibility of dying. Of course, it's not a possibility; it's a fact. So we're all going to die. You are going to die. I'm sorry to say that. I'm sorry to bring this news to you. And me
such
too.
a bummer now.
It's such a bummer for such a nice evening. But still, it is so different from each one. So even the assisted suicide is I'm exit for 20 years or something now. So I'm very much in favor of this thing, but it's not for everyone, of course not, and especially for the relatives. That's the really difficult part. All the relatives.
So, Marcus,
I think it's hard to deal with because it's a kind of professionalized dying where you have an expert and it's a kind of private group. There's no. You would like to say, hey, you want to be there. You want to. The daughter cannot be there. So we should, in my opinion, do anything as a society to prevent people from seeing such things. So it's a kind of failure of what's been going on before.
And knowing the exact time and date. So I have a friend and she told me that, my mother decided to die. And now that's right in that time I'm on vacation to Brazil. I bought my tickets. She doesn't have a lot of money. What should I do? And then I say, you can be there or not. You have two options, but it's the absurdity of this decision that influences all of us then. Yeah. So I think we have, it looks like a jump, but it's not a jump. It's a smooth transition to Lucians. We have Marcus Hafner as an expert. And I would like to ask you, how is Lukians or Lucian satire take the usual mourning topoi and give them a hilarious twist? So we want to hear more about that.
So turning to Lucian, he was a satirist from the 2nd century of our era from Syria. And among other things, he wrote a satire about how to grieve or about mourning behavior. We do not know much about Lucian, but we know one contemporary of his said, he was deadly serious about making people laugh. So Spoudios eis to gelasthenae. He was definitely funny, but he was dealing with deadly serious topics of the time. So the movie has shown, this short film has shown the topic of the voluntary or involuntary death after illness and of dying. And Lucian addresses this topic as well, but he especially focuses on the excessive behavior of the bereaved people, of the living people after such a deed. Lucian condemns people's mourning behavior as not very well reasoned. Yeah, they, according to him, they blindly follow social ritual, they blindly follow conventions of things that supposedly have to be done but are not necessary. So he says people actually do not know what the death is, so they come to false conclusions. So it's like what Socrates and philosophical schools in antiquity say, that actually we do not know what a death is about. So, or if we know it, we should adapt our behavior towards it. So actually he wants to guide the people towards a more self-determined, more autonomous way of leading their life and an attitude towards death. And to this end, he writes his piece, and he criticizes common notions of the underworld and of afterlife. So common or traditional descriptions of afterlife or of the underworld are full of contradictions, he says. And now he makes an experiment here and taking everything that is described in the underworld at face value. So the first text, he asks how people know so much about the underworld when it's a supposedly gloomy and dark space, actually. People believe that Hades is a place deep underground, large and spacious, gloomy and without sunlight. Yet to me it seems illuminated in a way that is beyond my comprehension, so that they can clearly see every single thing in it. And then why do we actually need this strange ferryman, who carries the souls of the dead over Lake Acheron, the Acheron Lake? He explains that, this lake must be too large, too big to cross it, even by swimming. And even the dead birds, it's the second passage. So Lake Acheron receives those who arrive. It's impossible to cross or pass through it without the ferryman, for it's too deep to wade through and too large to swim across. Not even dead birds can fly over it. So he also wonders about what happens to dead animals. He doesn't even talk about fish, but so... The next thing is that you have to pass a strange dog. So it's a clumsy dog. It greets strangers with wagging tail and smile, but it barks at those leaving. So the dog barks at the inhabitants of Hades. So there is no use of this dog as a guard dog at all, but you should protect the people inside from those outside. So it's a very strange dog. And why do we know about the underworld? Okay, there have been people such as Odysseus and Heracles who went down, or Orpheus also, and then they came back and told us about it. So it's described by venerable, and it's the last passage, and trustworthy witnesses who, it seems to me, had not drunk from the river Lethe, oblivion, for otherwise they would not have remembered it. So it's a clear contradiction that dead people have to drink from this, a cup from this river called oblivion and to forget their former lives. But then, strangely, Odysseus could tell us about everything he saw. So a lot of contradictions. And in a globalized world such as that of Lucian, he was Syrian, wrote in Greek, and was a member of the Roman Empire. Of course, a question arises as to how we should pay the ferryman at all, and in which currency. The custom is widespread among the people that as soon as one of their relatives dies, they quickly place an obolus in their mouth, which is to serve as payment for the ferryman for the crossing, without first checking what kind of currency is used and in circulation down there, and whether the Attic, Macedonian, or Aeginetan obolus is accepted as payment, nor that it would be far more advantage not to be able to pay the ferry fare at all, for then if the ferryman did not receive it, they would be turned away and returned to life. So if you could not pay, it would be better for you, actually. Why take money with you? And the second part of his treatise on mourning deals with mourning behavior and grief, and uses the example of an old father grieving for his dead son, a quite terrible scene, you would think, but the father then starts grieving excessively and beyond limit. This causes the dead son to return to life. He's a revenant, he comes back, and he criticizes his father's behavior. The father had complained that the son would not enjoy old age. And now the son turns the tables and asks, "Why did I want to grow so old and mad like you, father? What terrible misfortune do I seem to be suffering? Perhaps that I have not become an old man like you, bald, with a wrinkled face, hunchbacked, lame, short, and in short, frail under the influence of time, after I had drained the cup of so many months and Olympiads, which is a span of 4 years, to the dregs, and then finally behaved so badly in the presence of so many witnesses." So it's a humorous dig at the old age, how it deals with death, but also maybe we should not leave the whole grieving thing only to the old age. We could ask also for ourselves, or not leave the dealing with death only to one generation. One could also critically ask here. So the son would like to burst at laughing, but the bandages that keep the jaw from falling down in place, they prevent the son from laughing. So he says, "Therefore, by the gods of Hades, by Hades and Persephone, I have long been overcome with a desire to roar with laughter at what you have done, father, and said, but the linen and woolen bandages with which you have tied my jaws have prevented me." So we have an introspection here into the ancient ritual, or into the ritual which has been for a long time used to bind up the jaw of a dead person. So I come to my conclusion. Lucian uses the voice of the dead son to utter criticism and to laugh about the living people's unreflective behavior concerning death.
Thank you, Markus. So, I mean, this is impressive. We can laugh about words that are how old? I'm not going into numbers.
1,800 years.
So, isn't that, why do you think we can still laugh about these words and we are now in 2025?
Well, I think not only as ancient people, but also as people who have less ideas about Greek mythology, we can laugh. He doesn't use proper names, for example. It's all stereotypical, typical people, the son, the old father, what people think. And then he addresses the individual you. You should not believe what they say. Think yourself what is your opinion about that? And I think there is a lot of don'ts here. Don't be like this father. But indirectly, there's a lot about guidance and have an autonomous life without what the other people say. And I think this addresses everyone through the ages, I would say. Yeah.
And the funny thing is often to solve otherworldly problems with worldly solutions. And that's also a kind of the humor that is included. So do you have any kind of examples from your work that you think you could relate to that, to Lucian?
I love that he mentions these bandages, and we have that in the archaeological record as well. They were sometimes golden, or we find them on vase paintings. So I like that you really can catch up on these rituals. He really addresses the exact rituals we have in the archaeological record and in literature as well. And I think that what strikes us as so funny even today is that it's really modern, in that it is very skeptical towards the underworld and towards what happens there. And then there's this double paradox that he's actually being skeptical about a life after death. But the skeptical one, or the one is actually a revenant coming back to life and telling his father, "Oh, you believe this stuff, poor man." And so there's so many paradoxical things going on, elements that exclude each other, or that you really, in the end, you don't know what Lucian actually thinks or believes himself. And I think this is also a very important part of Lucian.
He uses a common feature from gravestones and grave epigrams that we still have today on the cemetery, that the on a gravestone there is something written, and it's the dead person speaking to us. So he has this underworldly perspective that is really it's good to have as a corrective voice to the living, I would say. So he plays with this underworldly voice
So actually, then we need an afterworld to be able to laugh about death, or is that going too far?
That's the question, if it exists. So Lucian has many texts about the underworld, and I think it's a place for fascination. I think he uses it also as a place that is common from literature, since the Odyssey. Odysseus recalls the death and the dead people he knows. So I think it's also a kind of a game, apart from the ethical aspects there.
Okay. Is there some relation between assisted suicide and believing in an afterlife?
I think listening to you talk about mourning and, thinking about the afterlife, it made me think about one film in particular, one of my favorite assisted dying films, if I may recommend it, which is Invasion Barbare, a Quebecois Franco-Canadian film of 2003, and it's the topic of a father who has a terminal illness, and his son comes to him. They are estranged, so it's also a father and a son, and it turns into a kind of living funeral where his friends are surrounded around the bed of this father, and the son kind of find to each other again. But there is a lot of discussion also about mourning, the performativity of mourning practices, and how often they are merely performance and not content. And then there's banter and sexual jokes, political irreverence. But underneath all of that, there is authenticity in that kind of mourning that happens during life. So I think it goes into a similar direction.
So then in Friederform, is your cultural work there about the afterlife or about life?
No, never. The thing is, if you talk about death, you never talk about death. You always talk about life. That's quite an interesting thing, actually, because, that's what, Michel de Montaigne also said, that doesn't interest us at all, because if we are death, then we're death, and if we're alive, so it's all about life and not about death, and that's something which really helped me also understand what I have to do. It's much more interesting to see the life before death and then afterward, remembering, of course, a life. So this death thing is just a 0 point, which is not very interesting, because we know what happens when you die. We know all the biochemical procedures. You know what's happening if someone dies. This is well forged. But more interesting is what is afterwards, and so far there's no evidence whatsoever that there is an afterwards. I'm sorry to say that, even if you're in a religious person, and I'm sorry to say that again, but it is, unfortunately, there's no evidence whatsoever in any religion or anywhere that there is something. So we can only believe, and believe has nothing to do with
But
science.
there's a lot of cultural production about the afterlife, right?
Of course there is.
So
Certainly.
it's a fictional...
The Bible, for example, it's very sort of...
for example, yes.
Very good, very literal.
So what I was thinking about is the text of Lucian during his time. What was the audience for these texts, and for what were the pragmatical aspect?
Well, some people say that he performed before a huge audience, like a concert speaker, actually. So he was very popular, traveled through the whole Mediterranean, was a stand-up comedian. He wrote in Greek, which was the lingua franca of the Mediterranean, at least the eastern part, but you could understand it also in the West. So he could have reach out to a huge audience. And I think he always wanted to be provocative on one hand, but also elusive, that if you know, for example, how Homer dealt with the underworld, how others dealt with the underworld, you could see some twists here and connect it also. But I think he had a lot for everyone also, because many people listened and they could not read, and they were probably in the audience, so they could enjoy it as well. So I think it was dealing with existential problems everyone could understand.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Do you think that people in this era normally believed in a proper afterlife?
there were, I mean, the cults show and that there were mysteries that show that there was an individual kind of afterlife for them and they could hope for it, but others did not. So I think it was a concept.
We're
of
agnostics as well, right? Not only Lucian. So
Right.
that's because...
Yeah, but he doesn't make any positive statements. He's just very, it's like, do you think this is true? This is true. So yeah, that's like high satire kind of works. It's not a solution to anything.
But starting a discussion and a field for reflection. That's how I understand you. Yeah.
I think so.
So we come back to you, to the Friedhofum and a cemetery. Do you think there is enough space for humor in a cemetery? Can funerals be funny?
Oh, there's a lot of you. Well, it's mostly slapstick, to be quite honest. You know? I mean, if you slip and fall into the grave, for example, you know, this is hilariously funny in a way, but also very tragic on the other hand at the same time. Or I don't know if a body is delayed, you know, if the undertaker gets in a traffic jam with the coffin in the back, and the people are waiting for it, you know, and
So this happened?
this happens, yeah, sure.
Okay.
And then the widow says, "Oh, that's." Well, Henry has always been late, you know. That's typical Henry. He's always like that. So this is funny in a way, and they were quite charming. And this sort of things happen, of course, yeah.
And does it what does it make with the people at the funeral? If something like that.
The thing is, I mean, it's like if you're in church or anywhere where you have to be solemn or in class, you know, and as soon as someone's, you know, pulling a joke, you know, you can't help yourself because you have to laugh, because as a release, you said that, you know, it's a release form, and that's why we have this Leichenschmaus. I don't know if there's an equivalent in English, when you go and have dinner or whatever. A funeral feast, exactly, a funeral feast. And they're very funny events normally, you know. You always laugh, and I haven't seen you for a long time, and there's always a big.
And the wine helps.
And the wine helps, of course.
Yeah.
Alcohol helps there as well.
Yeah.
And so these are very funny occasions, and I think it's very important to have this as a catharsis or to free yourself of this terrible thing.
But are there any gravestones in the Friedhof Silfeld where you could say, yeah, these have some funny inscriptions?
No, I mean, of course, they're the ones who said, you know, I told you I was sick and stuff like that. But you don't. I mean, they're not on the Silfeld. No, the thing is, you know, we are here in Zwingli town, so we are by tradition a little more solemn and more like held back a little bit. And don't forget that cemeteries, I mean, by Zwingli, they were forbidden. I mean, gravestones were forbidden for a long time. You know, they just started in the 19th century with the coming of the Bürgertum. That they built over the bourgeoisie. They built these big monuments where they said here lies, you know, Hürlimann, Bodmer, Pestalozzi, all these Swiss families or Zurich families. They showed, but there's only things like his life was full of work and that's what. But they're never funny stuff. I haven't seen anything yet, unfortunately.
Okay.
You have to go somewhere else for that, I guess. Not Zurich.
So in the antiquities, are there any grave inscriptions that are funny, or that do you know some of them?
I mean, so there are in the Greek anthology, they're preserved some funny grave inscriptions, and you never know whether they're proper grave inscriptions or made up. One is definitely made up. It says, well, stand still and mourn at this grave, which is actually empty because so-and-so, poet so-and-so erected me, the Nema, just to present his wonderful poem. And so there are definitely also jokes on this idea. And apart from that, I mean, there are lots of funerary epigrams that tell the mourners or the passers-by to enjoy life while it lasts. So this carpe diem motif is very strong on the grave inscriptions as well.
Protestantism didn't yet happen in the antiquities.
I remember one epigram. It's always dialogues, or often dialogues.
Yeah.
Sometimes the dead is speaking in a solely. And one person asks, why did this guy jump out of the window recently? And the other says, well, he was reading Plato's writing about immortality, or the features. So I think that's the reaction. So it's also
Cool.
But that's made up, no?
probably, but it's
He wanted to be
It's in a
true.
collection.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you think then humor is something universal about death, so that we can really laugh about, we talked about Lucian, so then can we say laughing about death is universal, something?
I think so. I think there are cultures and societies where it's more suppressed, where you are expected to behave more solemnly and maybe suppress this humorous aspects. But I think it would be very healthy to laugh more at the face of death, because it's so frightening, right?
Problem with tombstones, Jason, because you don't write your own tombstone normally. You know, I would say, okay, I would do something funny on it, but that's your relatives in charge for that, and they're mostly sad that you died. Well, mostly.
No, that's the interesting thing, because in what I'm looking at in these assisted dying narratives, this is switched around.
Yes.
You can write your own tombstone.
You could,
You can plan your own funeral, you know?
Because you know when you die.
You know when you die, and this gives you a whole set of new possibilities, I think, to often also practice humor. And I actually brought a book that I've just finished reading that came out a month ago by Swiss author Katja Früh, called Vielleicht ist die Liebe so, perhaps love is like that. And it's an auto-fictional book about a mother-daughter relationship. And there we have a mother who plans her own funeral meticulously and drags her daughter into it. And in one scene I thought, was so funny, because they go to an upscale shop on the Bahnhofstrasse, Grieder, and look for a dress that she can wear in the coffin. And it doesn't quite fit. And then they want to tell the shop assistant, well, actually, we don't really need to close it in the back, and the shop assistant really doesn't know how to react to this. And so I think it opens up this space when you can actually plan, but then of course, that doesn't necessarily make the relationships with those that will mourn you easier, because they maybe expect that they would have planned these kind of funerals.
For such assisted suicide, it is not.
It definitely is not, and I'm very that's very important for me, that in our project we are definitely not pro or against assisted dying. We're interested in these gray areas, because and that's actually also something you said. Many of these accounts are funny, but they are also very sad. And I think what you said at the beginning, is the ethical complexities, what we saw about coercion, what we saw about, leaving the family behind, not allowing them to mourn, question of empathy, that's all present in there too. And I think that's really important, that when we point at the humorous instances, that doesn't mean that there is a kind of superficial black or white engagement with some of these questions.
I think humor sometimes can relieve or get out our inner emotions, because sometimes mourning is really a conventional thing, especially in antiquity. There are so-called Trauerfrauen, females who are just designated to do the mourning stuff.
Mourning wives.
And they have to, mourning women, so to say certain words.
You book them, I mean.
It would be my favorite profession, to be honest.
Exactly. And laughing sometimes breaks through this kind of convention and shows us what people maybe think about that thing. So it's relieving.
And also laughing together. So, I mean, it's not just being at home by yourself, but having the possibility to laugh together, that's something also. So we have now the film, we have Lucian, we have the cemetery, so really the practical aspect, also the material aspect, but we have another material aspect, and I would like to add, we have the images, and so I would like to ask you, or to hand the floor over to you, and to tell us more about the humorous side of death, visually represented in Carpe Diem imagery.
Yes, And I'm so sorry that I didn't bring at least the grave relief where we have one obviously drunken person lying down on the floor, and he has fell off his bed, his dining bed, with a massive erection, and that was actually a grave relief. So there was space for humor after all. But I brought today some images that don't deal with a specific death or a specific loss, nor are they in the context, in a funerary context, but they're all from different dining and party contexts, so to say. So I coined them as laughing despite death. And here you see two random examples of floor mosaics from dining rooms where you see frolicking skeletons drinking or preparing drinks, and the mosaic on the left says Euphrosynos, that translates to be merry or be cheerful, and he is actually drinking, and there also is an amphora with wine and bread, so he has everything he needs. And so you have to imagine that people would recline on their dining beds, as they did back in the days, and would look down on their bony counterparts and reflect upon the brevity of human existence. And these skeletons really were regular guests in ancient party contexts. So the practice of showing skeletons or corpses actually is recorded for ancient Egypt as well by Herodotus, and then it made a career throughout the Mediterranean. Here are some examples from the Roman period. They're called larvae conviviales, or banquet ghosts, and are actually pretty small. You can fit them easily in your hand, and they have moving joints. So whenever you would throw them or move them, you could also create silly postures with them. And these were actually presented at dinner parties, we know that, but also they served as party giveaways at parties. So you could bring them home as a guest, and then at home they would serve as a reminder not only of the brevity of life, but also of a marvelous party you were once at. So these larvae conviviales are regularly mentioned in ancient texts as well, and the most famous passage comes from Petronius Satyricon, where he describes at length I wanted to say funeral feast, but no, the dinner party of a certain Trimalchio. He is a freedman, a former slave, and he's really a man of bad taste, or so what Petronius wants us to believe, and I quote, "As we drank the wine and commented in detail on the luxurious appointments, a slave brought in a silver skeleton with moving joints." I left that out, but it's important, with moving joints. And then he lets the slave throw it several times on the floor, and it takes all the different shapes and silly postures. And in the end, Trimalchio commented, "Thus we'll all be after Hades takes us away. Therefore, let's enjoy life while we can live well." So this skeleton clearly is a carpe diem motive, but was it meant to be funny or at least slightly amusing? We're not so certain, and there are also different opinions on that. And my very last example, I promise, may lead in a direction. You see here a silver cup, again used in a symposium or a convivium, again from the early imperial period, and there are several skeletons gathered around. They're named as famous poets and philosophers from the Greek past. And on the right here you can see Zenon, the famous Stoic philosopher, pointing his finger at Epicurus, the founder of hedonistic philosophy, who's in turn reaching for a huge pie lying on the table, and he's saying, pleasure is the ultimate goal. Here, to telos hedone. And also there is a pig or dog. We are not really, it's not very clear, but this animal, two-headed animal, very strange, is actually mimicking this gesture of longing. So Epicurus is kind of, mirroring this creature of lust downstairs. And so they're clearly engaging, but and it's clearly more than just moral memento mori. But it's funny? I'd like to ask you, so I'll stop here, and I'm curious what you have to say.
Thank you very much for these images, and it also shows that you can never explain as good as you want. If you show it, then we have really a good impression of what are you talking about. And it's really, I wondered for whom were these cups? Were they for use, or were they just for exhibition? And who was allowed to use them? Who did?
Oh God, I should have looked into the, damn it, no, the context of the Bosco Reale treasures. These silver cups are part of a huge silver treasure from Bosco Reale. So it is a villa in the Vesuvian era, which was conserved during the Vesuvian outbreak. So these were leisure class people from the upper class who could actually afford manufactured silverware like this, but it's not reserved for the imperial family or something like that. And these silver and bronze skeletons, so there are also skeletons in less pricely materials, so not everyone could afford, of course, giving away these as a present for the guest. But yeah, it was also a sign of showing off that you're rich enough to give presents, giveaways.
Marcus?
I have a question concerning the Petronius passage. I always wonder when I read this piece, is it because it's this vulgar group of people, and Trimalchio, this parvenu, and Petronius is maybe, it's question of Petronius, how he's dealing with these people. Is this a moment, a topic of laughing about these people, how they deal with death, or is it more an inclusive laughing with the protagonists in this moment when we deal with this common carpe diem motive? So what do you think?
I think it's both. I think there are many Trimalchios in ancient society. There were many freedmen and many people who would read that and think, yeah, well, he's a decent man. I think there's two levels. Probably Petronius is clearly mocking Trimalchio for his exaggerated style and his lavish things, but nevertheless, the archaeological record shows us that these were actually used and that they existed in reality. So it's not just an exaggerated portrayal of some goofy freedman, but it really was a practice in everyday life. So, well, maybe Petronius mocks it as Lucian does, but it's more. It shows us that these people existed. Just with Lucian and his mourners, you know, he documents real practices.
So I have a look at the time, and I think we have now a moment to open the discussion to the audience. If there are any questions or remarks, or yes, please. There is one person.
First, I want to say thank you for arranging this. I read the title, also Titelklasse Hüt. Bin ich in Spital gegangen. Sorry, it's English. I went into the hospital for a reason. And I thought, actually, that this would be laughing at death, humor in the face of mortality, from the position of people who are alive. People are alive. So here's a research possibility for you to build on and get your second. I work in academia, so it's a chance to get a second funding round. And I think what's really interesting, I live in multiple countries, not like many people here and like many of you, yeah? So the discussion has not gone to positions. The positions became a little bit clear here. It's obviously, we're in a religious country. Power, and the issue of power with assisted dying, I think is really important, or people who are sorry, I'm not trying to hog the microphone. Sontag read about, you have 2 passports. Okay.
In the kingdom of the living.
Yeah,
and
we're all going to get the passport of the ill at some point or die. And belief systems. So I just want to stir it up a little bit here. And there's a great book. I never thought I'd ever suggest a novel called Catabasis that's just come out. That's all about this, yeah. So I would like to know a little bit more about the living and laughing at death, Galgenhumor. Is it something that you prepared for, or would that be another panel?
No, probably that was a question. You have the microphones, you don't. It's good. Who wants to start?
Sorry, once again?
Do you want to start? You wanted to answer the question?
Well, I'm not quite sure what the question is, actually, but positions about if humor is helpful, or if humor is at all necessary, and by all means it is for everything, because we cannot live our life without having humor. We die immediately because it's our existence is so bizarre and absurd sometimes. We have to laugh about it. That's my personal opinion on it. So that's why that's included.
Sorry, I should have said was, I was expecting a discussion about I was expecting a discussion about your observations of people who are in that situation, choosing it or not having a choice, having family not, and they. And it seems this was mostly about they.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That's a fair, it's not a critique, but it's an observation.
Yeah.
With antiquity, then of course it's they, because it's past. So, there's not much you can do about it, really.
Yeah. So there is another question in the back.
Thank you very much. Since you, 3 of you come from the Center of Study for Ancient World, I just want to bring up in a lot of ancient wisdom, like Tibetan, Egyptian, Indian, we all have death books. So to me, life and death is just inhale, exhale. I feel our understanding of life and death today is very superficial, but there are so many documentaries of people who had a near-death experience. They came back, they say there's no death. So I feel the fear of death is us not knowing what life really is about. I feel some ancient wisdom actually can help people to understand that.
Well, coming from the Greek and Roman wisdom, or especially the Greek wisdom, it's actually the opposite. So people, in my opinion, we never can be certain, but of course there was some afterlife, but this was not important. It was some gloomy, dark place you didn't want to be in. Even Achilles said, we don't want to be in. So the best to do is to live life to its fullest and to enjoy while you can, because afterwards it's just going down. So there are different belief systems and different wisdoms here. So I would, as a Greek archaeologist, I would subscribe to the Greek wisdom of, taking what you have, and the rest is uncertain.
The Epicure way.
Anna and Marcus, any comment?
Maybe just a short reflection, because you mentioned that you think that our contemporary engagement with death and dying, I think you called it, is sometimes superficial. And while I very much believe that, engagement with, the books of the dead is certainly, for us helpful and an interesting resource for thinking also about our relationship to death. And, we could talk about the role that humor plays there too. I do think what is fascinating to me is that while for a long time there was this idea, particularly in the 20th century in the Western world, we have death is a taboo, we don't talk about it, it's pushed into the hospital, it's institutionalized, we don't do public mourning, we live in a secularized society. What we've seen in the last couple of decades is actually an explosion of texts, films, images around death and dying. And I personally think that many of them are very interesting. And of course, they show a death culture that is in transition. And many of the, productions that I work on, I think humor also plays the role of allowing us the space where we can try out new rituals. We don't quite know how they work. But I see a lot of engagement with the topic, actually, and I think a lot of it is quite fascinating.
Marcus?
Well, I'm just a historian of literature, so I just want to excavate these ancient positions and bring them to discourse nowadays. And I think it's a variety of different positions towards death. Many of them converge to one question or one saying that life is a kind of an exercise for dying or preparation for it. And I think also Lucian contributed to this. And even if he doesn't give any definitive answers, but still it's about self-reflection and questioning. So this is maybe a philosophical answer, but I find it in many ancient positions about death.
I'm so interested because would you say that once you have the answer or you strongly believe in death being not important or being just the beginning of something else, is there no need for humor anymore? Or
No,
can you
I don't mean that way. What I meant is more, the definition of what is life, what is death. This goes a little bit too far, but I think today the science actually is starting to meet its ancient wisdom. It's about fundamentally what is nature of reality, which to me is energy consciousness, frequency, vibration. And so we understand why we are afraid of death, because we identify with physical body only. That's my point.
Because that's what we are, we are a physical body.
We are more than physical body. We are more than
Maybe it's difficult to prove it here.
It's very difficult to prove it.
We need more time to prove that than this evening.
And it's a long discussion, I guess, as well.
And what I know is now that we have 3 minutes left. That is for sure. And I would like
there was one question.
There is one question, so we have space for one question, sure.
To continue this discussion, thank you very much for the panel. Just to continue about the focus on the physical death, it's just the observation and also a question. In this medias we saw. Yeah, genau. In this media, we saw the film and the images, and it's very focused on the physical death. And is there also an area which has a look on the mental and the spirit or the soul journey? So that's the point about just this very focused one, and just a trilogy, body and spirit and soul. And is there anything about the spiritual thing which is not the
for you? I love the fact actually that there were 3 questions that kind of point to the fact that we have to do another round. And
I am a scholar in the study of religion, and I can tell you, religion, the history of religion is full of narratives about the spiritual dimension of death. So have a look in that, area.
Yeah, my question would be, the focus on the physical death is very full of loving and humor, because it helps a lot. You don't know what to do, so humor can help. It's just like also a ritual. But is there also as much about the soul aspect and the spirit aspect? Is there also that much humor on these areas? That would be very interesting. Or is that more?
The afterworld is spiritual and it's mental. It's just it's a fiction. It's a fiction. It doesn't exist really. It's an idea people produce. So it's full of.
There were the Platonic and Pythagorean ancient wisdom texts that said it's dying, or it's kind of a changing of shape, a transmigration of the soul to another form. And there is a satirical text by Lucian where an animal speaks to someone and says, I've been Pythagoras in my former existence, and I've been various forms. Yeah. So you can also make fun about Pythagorean transmigration of the soul, and then you become a rooster, you become something else. So there is also a possibility, I think, for humor.
For another round. Thank you so much.
I don't believe in it. Probably.
Hey, we come now to the last round of this panel discussion. I would like to hear just short statement of you. How does your professional work, your research, change your approach to death and dealing with death and humor with death? Does it influence? I mean, my work in about death studies does definitely change, but it's not. I would like to hear of you how it changes your idea of death and dealing with death. Does it?
Definitely. I mean, I said it before. So dealing or studying these different Greek, especially Greek forms of mourning rituals, and also the conceptions of the afterlife, which weren't really there in a way. I think it's a very modern concept that kind of gives skepticists like me, or even not believers, a nice framework to actually see that mourning and also rituals and even religion can be so useful, even if you don't believe in an afterlife or in a certain divine being. But it's the social aspect of ritual that binds us together, and that is so important.
Marcus?
So what I found and find tonight is what I find very great is to bring different disciplines.
Yeah.
Okay. What I find great, especially of tonight, is bringing different disciplines and people together. Also, ancient history, archaeology has so much to tell about death in antiquity, and I was carrying out in Graz, we talked to people from palliative ethics and how their perspective on it, and I think this really enriches a discussion and helped me a lot also to deal with.
Yeah.
Okay. Anna?
Yeah, I think first of all, when you spend 8 hours a day reading texts or watching films about death and dying, you definitely get into a carpe diem mindset, if you want it or not. You know, it just happens. It also means that, I started out with a kind of position on what I think about assisted dying, and this position is now shifting almost on a daily basis. I really don't know what to think about it anymore, and I actually really enjoy that about my job, that I get the time and space to do that, and that I've also come to realize that humor plays such an important role in that space. I did some field work in palliative care as well, and witnessing the role that humor plays for healthcare professionals made me realize what kind of vital function it has in this topic.
Okay, thank you. Reto?
Well, dealing with death on a professional level, with colleagues who are constantly confronted with deaf people. If you have to pick someone up in a heated apartment after 3 weeks, that's not a nice job to do, Or going to someone who take their child away, it's not a funny thing to do. And there's lots of tragic all the time around it. And I think this carpe diem aspect is quite, you enjoy life much more. So that's what I said, it's much more about life. And even if the undertakers are much more I'll concentrate my life then on death. So death doesn't play a big role anymore, and it loses the fear a little bit. Humor, on the other hand, especially also, I'm also a film buff, and there's so many funny, hilarious films about death, which obviously gallow humor, I did best mostly, or slapstick or whatever. There's a new series on Amazon called Total Rüber, which I think is really funny. It's also Vienna, or the Viennese, they invented death. They really sort of they have the copyright on that.
They claim to have invented death. So.
So it is still it helps me. I mean, the laughter helps a lot to get over this severe, heavy. It helps.
Also for you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We are at the end of this discussion, and I want to thank the audience for coming here at this early hour and listening to us. And I'm handing over now for the closing word to Victoria.
Yeah. No closing words apart from that I'm very happy to now invite you all to the more informal part of this evening. We are having a little convivium or funeral feast, if you like, down the hall in the Rudolf Wolf Saal. And if you want to keep the conversation alive, we also prepared some visual input and inspiration for you. So check out the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you all. My warm thanks to the panelists and to Marie-Therese Mäder for guiding us so wonderfully. And of course to the audience for your interest and your input. And now, let's celebrate while we're still alive, I'd say.
Let's feast.